hope you are having a great weekend. And to keep the brain stimulating, I thought I will share another AI Chronicles episode with you. And to do so, I invited Peyton Casper. Hi, Peyton. How are you doing?
Good. How are you doing today?
So far, so good. No complaints. It's weekend. Everyone's happy, I'm sure. Oh,
Exactly.
so where are you joining us from?
So I live in San Francisco, but I'm traveling right now.
Oh, okay. And do you like living in in the city here?
I do. Yeah. I moved here about a year and a half ago. So I live in Hayes Valley, which
Ah,
is a fantastic part of the city. So really enjoy it.
nice. Good area. Yeah, I think I moved to the city late January of this year. Was in the Bay Area, but I was in the East Bay, not so happening. But yeah, so far it's really good to be in the city with, where all the action's happening when it comes to AI.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah. Great. Okay. So, I saw your profile on LinkedIn and I'm like, okay, this is the person I would love to talk to because your experience is pretty wide and you recently started your company, but we'll get to that a little later. First things first, I know there are so many different job titles that are out there. There's MLE, then there's data engineer, then data analyst, and then machine learning scientist, applied scientist, blah, 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 blah. But when I came across AI solutions engineer on your profile, I'd love to know like what is an AI solutions engineer in your opinion?
Sure. So I think like the big thing to understand about kind of like solutions engineering as a whole is it's a little bit more like customer focused. So there's this concept of like pre-sales and post-sales. Post-sales is kind of like your typical consulting role where you would help a customer like implement and kind of get hands-on. Whereas pre-sales is more focused on kind of helping a customer understand like the value of a product, helping them sort of understand how it would fit into their company, and then kind of ultimately scoping that out and helping them set up the solution to some degree, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when we think about like solutions engineering, it's a little bit more of a sales focused role where like you're going to be interacting with customers more often. Um, but I find that like typically like the best like solutions engineers are also the ones that can dive a little bit deeper because there's definitely like an aspect where you need to be able to take very complex topics and kind of break them down and help people
Mm-hmm.
understand like what those topics are and then also obviously connect it back to like what they're actually trying to accomplish at the end of the day.
So is it like equivalent to what some companies call customer engineer or that's different? Because I know solutions engineer is probably also customer facing to an extent.
Yeah, so I mean, solutions engineer is, I would say, probably about 70% customer facing. Um, I've not heard the term customer engineer. I know like there's like customer success, which is more of a
Yeah.
kind of ensuring customers get value out of the product. I think another like typical term would be like sales engineer,
Ah,
maybe
yeah.
like more traditional like SaaS like business. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, got it, got it. So, what qualifications will make a perfect candidate for this role?
Sure. So I think like when I'm talking to candidates that are like interviewing, the
Mm-hmm.
first thing I look for is like realistically like curiosity. I think that goes a long way, and obviously that applies to a lot of different roles. But um, when you deal with customer facing roles, like the biggest aspect of it is the fact that a lot of customers have pretty much every technology under the sun. So you're having to kind of jump between different customers, which have different tech stacks, different interests, um, and you really need that ability to kind of pick things up and be able to learn things quickly. So curiosity, like for the space, is like number one. The second aspect is like being able to learn things quickly, like I just said. Um, so when you're in a room and you're talking to a customer and they mention, we're using this solution, we're using that solution, um, one it's obviously acceptable to kind of say, okay, like I need to go back and research that and figure it out. But you have realistically like a few days to kind of figure that out and ultimately kind of get back to them. Um, and then the final aspect of it, I would say, is like that ability to kind of synthesize information with your knowledge and then like what you're hearing. So when you're actually in that room and you're talking to a customer, uh, being able to have them describe what particular solution or what is happening in their tech stack, and then correlate that with kind of like systems that you're familiar with or kind of like foundational thinking that you might have. So that way you can quickly fit things in, right? So an example might be, if a customer is talking about a particular queue, let's say it's like Tibco, which is a very old piece of software at this point. The reality is like a queue still works, whether it's RabbitMQ, if it's Kafka, if it's a Redis queue, et cetera, right? So being able to break those things down into kind of their building blocks and understand like fundamentally how do these systems work allows you to kind of build those like first principles and like quickly adapt to like different situations, which I think is really important.
Hmm, got it. Wow. Okay. It's an intense role, I would say. Um, so,
Yeah.
sorry, you were saying something?
No, I mean, I think you get used to it, right? I think it's an interesting role because it's a blend of kind of like your traditional engineering, right? Like I have a computer science
Exactly.
background, yeah, but uh, also having those like people facing skills and the
Mm.
presentation skills, right? Um, I don't know, it's an enjoyable role. It kind of keeps you stimulated, if you will. So it's good.
That was my next question. Like, what do you enjoy about this role?
Yeah. Um, I think like yeah, I think like like being like challenged is a big thing for me. Early
Right.
on in my career, like I ended up in a role where I was doing like frontline support, I was doing like consulting, like solution architect type role, and also doing like pre-sales where we'd have to kind of pitch and help a
Mm.
customer understand the value. Um, Doing all of that as one person, there was two of us in this role. We were supporting about 500 startups at the time. Um, you just got very good at like doing things very quickly and efficiently. Um, and then from there, I kind of like decided like, while I enjoy having that engineering background and like, especially like my day to day with like Coffee Black and stuff, like, I can build out systems and talk about distributed systems and data and all that. Um, there's a lot of value in being able to take something and break it down and help somebody understand. And then ultimately, like when we talk about, selling, I think it gets a bit of a bad rap in the engineering community, right? The reality is you can build the best product in the world, but if nobody knows what it does or knows about it at all, none of that really matters,
What's the
right?
point? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a nice like I think detour. I definitely didn't expect to go down that route. There's a very interesting story around that. But I'm glad for that I've had the experience over the past 8 years or so. So
Nice, very nice. And I know you mentioned like I asked like what qualifications and be able to break down certain like solutions that customers already have and just engineering background. So like if you were asked like okay, somebody approaches you to understand like what kind of technical skills should someone have to be a solutions engineer, especially in the AI space. What are like, I don't know, maybe two, three skills that you would suggest them to have or build?
I think if you're coming from an engineering background,
Hmm.
the biggest thing is to kind of take stock of like what your social skills currently are and to be like really honest with yourself, right?
Right,
Um,
right.
I think a lot of times, like we don't, and speaking for everybody, we don't get pushed to kind of step out of our comfort zone and get
Yeah.
comfortable speaking in front of people. Um, we don't get comfortable sitting in a room and like getting challenged, right? So like, I know that seems weird. Like I think especially in like engineering fields, we place a lot of emphasis on meritocracy. Um,
Hmm.
and that's true. But there's a way to go about it without necessarily kind of um, directly or maybe being rude or like causing like an issue with people, right? So when we talk about like actually like challenging somebody in a room, you can't just call somebody wrong just like flat out, right? I mean, there are definitely environments where that can happen, but the vast majority of environments that doesn't always go down as well as it could. There are ways of kind of talking to a person and helping them come to the conclusion or come to a conclusion by asking them questions, right? Um, so, a mentor of mine very early on kind of introduced me to this idea of like the Socratic method, which is basically instead of speaking, saying statements, your only objective is to really ask questions. Um, and once you practice that for a little while, you get pretty good at just sort of kind of turning, what you're trying to teach somebody into a series of questions and you kind of guide them along that path. And I find like when you're able to do that, it's a much more compelling approach because you're helping them kind of walk through those first principles to reach the same conclusion that you have. But
Right,
it
yes.
Yeah, but it requires you to go down that path because you have to know like, okay, as I'm having this conversation, where is the you like where is this person on kind of their journey of understanding, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I think like kind of understanding that psychology is important. The second one, like being like comfortable with people, right? Like, I actually realized like I before working at Pinecone, I was at contextual AI for a bit, kind of moved back into like a pure engineering role, and realized that like over time as a solutions engineer, I kind of built up this kind of extroverted personality. So like, 6 years ago, 7 years ago, I didn't enjoy talking to people really at all. So building that out and now kind of needing that, I realized like I can't just sit in front of a computer all day. Um, so that's like the other aspect. But then from like pure like technical skills, right? Um, I think like understanding systems level thinking, which I think is becoming more important with AI as a whole, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If you look at like the way that I use LLMs now, and the way that I see successful people using like successful engineers using LLMs is not so much focused on like the implementation of like, how is this code implemented or like is this good quality code, but it's more focused on, okay, I kind of know this LLM can write code, but I need to
Mm-hmm.
focus on like the high level objects or objectives that I need to accomplish and describe them very well, right? Um, so that systems level thinking is really, really important. And I think that's something that you don't really get or you don't get taught until you have about 3 or 4 years worth of experience under your belt, because it takes time to kind of work through those like what I would consider like junior engineer level, uh, pretty typical like traits, if you will. Um, and then I think standard like obviously like knowing how to write Python, right? I mean, a lot of
Yeah.
the work is going to happen in a notebook, um, interacting with like different databases, but like SQL is functionally the same across like, MS SQL, Postgres, et cetera, right? Queues are functionally the same. Uh, Distributed like processing systems like Spark are functionally the same, right? Um, I don't place a ton of emphasis on specific like tools that you know.
Mm.
So like if you know like Databricks, great. If you know open source Spark, great. But like at the end of the day, understanding what that does and like knowing that, okay, it's in my brain, but like I'm gonna have to go look something up. Great. Like when you need it, like you can go look it up. But on the day to day, like being able to, perform Panda's magic, like that's nice and it's a fun like magic trick in a sense. But when you deal with kind of interacting with so many different systems and so many different customer environments, it's not really realistic to walk in with a full understanding of everything. So I would stress like don't think that you need to be the most technical person on the planet. I think it would be more like, hey, I've been doing this engineering thing for a while. Really interested. Maybe I have more of a social side to me, and I kind of want to like flex that a little bit, or practice that, because I have different, aspirations, right? Maybe I want to be a founder. Maybe, um, I want to work in like product. I think an interesting aspect of solutions engineering is a lot of product managers that I've met were solutions engineers at one point, because
Interesting.
there's a strong overlap in that ability to go to a
Mm.
customer, understand what their problem is, bring back those requirements, and then work with an engineering team or work with a product team to actually get that delivered, right? So typically they'll either kind of stay in that solution engineering path or they'll move into product after, maybe 8, 10 years, something like that. So
You know, listening to you, I just realized that this would be a perfect clip for anybody who wants to understand what solution engineering is in the AI space. It's like perfect breakdown of all the technical skills, the soft skills, what to expect, what not to do, what to do. This was perfect. I think, yeah, I'm really glad I asked you this question. I'm sure this will be very helpful for people who are looking into getting into this space, and especially people who are more like who like you, like how you were 6 years ago, not wanting to talk to people, and I totally can understand that part. It's just they can still be customer facing, they can still succeed, so that's a very good example for those people too. So now, continuing to talk about your experience, how is or was your transition to becoming a founder of a startup from working as a solutions engineer? And I'm sure, all the people skills and soft skills must be very handy becoming a founder.
yeah. I mean, so I've always kind of wanted to build my own startup, right? I think it's always been an interest of mine. I think there's a lot of uh, self-confidence that personally, I mean, that you have to work on. Maybe some people are born with that
Yeah.
confidence. Definitely wasn't the case for me. Um, So a lot of like the career was kind of a lot of my career is always with a back in my mind, asking myself, okay, what about this role is going to let me learn a skill set that I don't
Mm-hmm.
currently have that I
Mm-hmm.
think will be successful, right? Um, so uh, working in sales, trying to branch in, work, do collaborations with like marketing, whether it's like blog posts or, you know, videos or things like that. Learning those sales, the soft skills, making sure that I keep my engineering skills up to date. Um, but in terms of like actually transitioning to become a founder, right? I mean, I think it comes down to like finding that idea that like you have enough conviction in. Um, I think we're at a really interesting point in time. Um, if you go back 10 years, well, I guess 14 at this point, uh, was kind of like the dawn of like the big data age or decade. So it's when we saw things like DynamoDB getting built, Cassandra,
Mm-hmm.
MongoDB. You saw Hadoop and Cloudera come out and all that. Um, and those really define kind of like the decade for the tech industry. And I think there's actually a great paper, or it's a memo from Jeff Bezos that was defining like the API standard for
Mm-hmm.
Amazon,
Mm-hmm.
and it was written back then, where basically every service within Amazon was going to talk via an API. Um, and you fast forward 10 years and you look back at that and you're like, well, that's obvious. Like, an API, it's a structured response. It's what you want. But back then that was I remember being an intern and reading that paper and was like, wow, that's crazy. Like to think that everything's going to be a JSON response and we're going to have REST APIs. Uh, and you look at AWS and it's very much like building blocks, right? Where you kind of piece all these
Mm-hmm.
things together. So that's there. Um, and the reason I bring that up is like, LLMs kind of represent that foundational shift where we're kind of back in that mode where it's like no one really knows what's going to happen, and anybody that like
Yeah.
comes out and says they do, or it's making a pretty bold
Mm.
bet. But um, I think that's really exciting, right? I think like I actually just tweeted this to somebody the other day, but there's that quote that's sometimes there's decades where nothing happens, and sometimes there's weeks where a decade happens functionally, right?
That's a
Um,
good one.
yeah, and I think like if you're interested, right, in going down this path, right, like this is like one of those moments where you have a chance at actually like building something that can be big, right? And that's not to say like for the past 5 years there wasn't that chance, but um, I think specifically looking at like LLMs, like uh, the amount of innovation that's going to happen, and I mean it's already happening, but it's going to happen over the next 3, 4 years in like fundamental ways that we interact with computers and interact with systems and data, like that's really exciting. So for me, it's one kind of having the conviction around an idea, but then two, it's just like even if that idea doesn't work out, like there are so many different things to kind of play around with and try right now that like if I didn't take that chance, right? You might be waiting another decade or so, right? So um, yeah, and then like in terms of the transition, right? I mean, uh, I was talking to somebody the other day. They were really interested in being a founder, and we were just chatting about things in general, and we were actually talking about him like working with me for a little bit, and he, uh, I had told him about kind of like some of the things that I needed done, and he came back to me and he asked me like, candidly, like I can't do this without some form of like reward, like as motivation, right? Like some way to track. And I was like, congratulations, like now we're negotiating, right? And the reason I bring the story up is uh, a lot of times, like especially like engineering, we don't really get taught to ask for things. Like once again, going back to that meritocracy, we kind of expect, well, if we do good work, we'll be, rewarded for it. It's not really the case. And I think that's important to recognize because like, you know, people that get the things that they want functionally go out and ask for them. Um, and so I think like, uh, you know, in sales, you learn that. The first time you reach out to somebody cold, they're probably not going to respond. The second
Yeah.
and third time you reach out, they're probably not going to respond, right? After the fourth or fifth time, then they might finally respond, right? And it's about finding like those timings where like, okay, they're starting a new project and they saw your post and now like those two things intersected, right? Um, you don't really get that skill outside of scales to kind of be persistent because we think, oh, it's like, well, if they didn't respond to us, they don't want to hear from us. I mean, it's, we're all busy. We all have lives. So anyways,
Yeah.
that as a founder, that applies to VCs, that applies to customers, that applies to, everything, right? So yeah.
Something I have heard a lot from various different founders. One founder is in my family, so I know the pain of, or at least the quality or the skill of being persistent. You have to, if you're not persistent, you might want to develop when you do become a founder, right?
Yeah. What's been the biggest thing that you've learned from that family member?
Um, s- from my family member, like, oh,
Yeah, that's a founder.
persistence, that's the one thing. Patience, that's one. Believing in your product that it has the value to contribute. I feel like if the founders I don't know, if they lose the belief that in their own product, I don't think that they can sell it properly or they can pitch about it properly. So that's like one thing. That's why I keep asking. I'm like, do you still believe in your product? If you do, keep it up. That's why
Mm.
probably why you're persistent too, and you're okay being, to go down that path. So yeah, these are like the couple of things, and I think being persistent, it probably could be applied in many different aspects, whether you're a founder or no. But yeah, to answer your question, those were the few things that I've learned.
Very cool.
Nice. Okay. Let's talk about projects and AI projects particularly. So, how do you choose your tools for building an AI project? Like, do you do any kind of experiments, or do you usually work on to like try out different? There are so many vector databases, for example, models. I have lost count of how many companies are building LLMs. So yeah, how do you choose? How do you build a project?
Yeah. I started somebody like 2 months ago. It
Hmm.
was actually in a sales and a solutions engineering context. It was in a competitive context. We were talking about a competitor to Pinecone. Um, I think it's a good question to ask, like, what is the best tool mean to you? And
Yeah.
I don't think we ask that question enough. I think because a lot of us have an engineering background, we get so tied into the performance of something, right?
Mhm.
So we think we need the fastest, we need the lowest latency, the highest throughput, whatever, right?
Yeah.
Um, the reality is like the vast majority of projects that you're probably going to leverage this tool for aren't going to necessarily stress those requirements as you would expect. Um, so a lot of times there's other like attributes that might be more interesting, like the developer experience, right? Or the ease of getting things set up, or the reliability that you don't have to worry about, right? From like SaaS solutions and stuff. Um, and then like the other aspect of it is like think about like where you're at, right? So, like this has been the biggest thing as a founder. Like I'm a solo like engineer working on my project right now. 90% of what I'm working on runs on my laptop. Um, I don't really need a vector database that's, scalable, hosted in the cloud that can do anything, right? Um, Same for like a distributed like processing system like Spark. Now, if I was going to go to a bank, an enterprise bank, and I was going to set up a data pipeline for, 100 data scientists, right? That, they're going to have different models coming in and out, and we're going to have to take in different types of data. But that completely changes kind of the math that we're doing and the requirements that we have to solve. Um, so I say that all to say the tools that I can use as like an individual person are completely different than the tools that somebody at JPMC can use, right? Um,
Hmm.
and we didn't even get into like security requirements, right? There are tools that I can play around with that like, a dev at
Companies may not.
JPMC. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I think that's the first thing is like understanding what best actually means, because when you drill into
Hmm.
those requirements, a lot of times people haven't even really thought through that question. The second aspect of it is, yeah, it's lots of experimentation, right? I mean, um, I'm playing around with this idea right now. I read this fantastic Twitter thread from a PhD out in Berkeley, and she
Mm-hmm.
was talking about this idea of like LLMs are kind of requiring this like iterative approach to solving problems, right? So like uh, the way we traditionally have designed solutions, designed applications, is it's kind of one shot, but it always works. So it's very constrained, like the data needs to come in a particular way. The process takes that data and then it does it, assuming there's no bugs, and then it produces a result, right? And so like we know it's perfect. And um, obviously, like with LLMs, that has fundamentally shifted. Where now like it's non-deterministic, so like everything changes. And the way she was like describing it is the interfaces that we need to have now need to be iterative, where we kind of we try something and we see what the output looks like, and then we change it and we see what the next output looks like, right? We have this ability to kind of refine the way that we work. And I was reflecting on that post like over the past day, and so I've been using a piece of software called Cursor like a lot. Like pretty much all of the work I
Mm-hmm.
do now is in Cursor. Um, and I was thinking about the way that I was interacting with it, and it's exactly like that. So like when I start off with a file that's empty, I start off with a
Mm-hmm.
very high level objective, right? It's like if I knew, like I know exactly what it needs to be at the end, but like if I typed all that out, it would never be able to solve it, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of finding like those like levels where it's like, okay, let's put the skeleton in place. And now that we have the skeleton, let's put in, the muscles, and then let's put in the veins, and let's put in the uh, I don't know, whatever else is left. And you're kind of like iteratively like building on this, but then there's moments where it doesn't quite get it right. So then you have to back up and you have to like prompt it better, right? Um, so I think like that's like it's very similar where playing with lots of different tools and just kind of like trying them out. Does Gemini work well with this? Does Claude work well with this? Um, like for example, a lot of the work that I'm doing is with Neo4j and working with like
Mm-hmm.
a graph database. Um, so playing around with that, like different types of schemas. Um, I don't know. I think constraining the problem that you're working on down, so that way
Mm-hmm.
you can run lots of experiments quickly, see what works, and then take the things that work and kind of move on to the next step is the best way to figure out like, which tools.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, but candidly, and I speak from a kind of a place where I can move quickly. That doesn't
Yeah.
always work with everybody. So going back to kind of the first part, like understand like what your requirements actually
Yeah.
are, because that drives them. So
That's probably the best way to start working on any project to understand what are you trying to build, what do you want to get out of it. That makes sense.
yeah.
And you're speaking of like having multiple components to do one thing, like building one thing after the other to in a flow. What are your thoughts on AI agents?
I think agents are an interesting spot right now. Somebody that I was close with, they are building a project or company called AgentOps, which is basically kind of
Ah,
focused on analytics. Yeah.
Alex.
Yep. Alex. Yeah.
Okay.
Um, so, uh, I mean, he started that like a year and a half ago, right? Which is
Hmm.
kind of crazy to think about. Like agents were like, I mean, agents still
Not
aren't
that
in the
big at the
mainstream.
time.
Yeah, exactly, right. Talk about like making a bet. And but I think what's interesting about that, right, is like reliability is the core of like any agent, right? So um, if an agent fails 50% of the time on step one, and then it fails 50% of the time on step two, right? The compounding effect of the error rate over the course of the agent's lifetime is huge, right? I mean,
Hmm.
by step five, it would basically be non-functional, right?
Yeah.
Um, so factoring in how do I take those outputs? How do I evaluate the accuracy at any given step and improve each of those steps iteratively? I think it's one of the core challenges for agents to actually overcome before they can be used, right?
Hmm.
So uh, when I was at Pinecone, like me and the sales rep, one of the sales reps that I was supporting, we started looking into this tool called Bland, which is kind of a AI agent for like outbounding, so like calling people and like interacting with them and kind of trying to set up like an initial meeting, basically. Um, and it's a flow-based approach. So like, in this step they it'll kind of talk about this topic, and then in this step it'll talk about the next topic, right? And then it can pull in like a vector database to do like objection handling and stuff. So it's pretty cool stuff. But um, the core point is still the same. Like, hey, like all of these steps need to reliably happen, right? I mean, at the end of the
Yeah.
day, like an agent's kind of that recursive approach
Hmm.
on calling an LLM. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think like obviously I see the vision, right? Like, I mean, Sam Altman, I think the other day just said like we're like one step away from like having agents, right? So like O1 was kind of like the like level two where it can kind of do
Mm.
that reasoning, and like level three is like a functioning agent, right? Um, I think that's definitely true, but I think there's a lot um, that we need to get right about evaluation first.
Yes.
Um,
Hmm.
and I don't
Absolutely.
actually, yeah, I don't think we're spending enough time talking about evaluation and like how do you actually do that? Because we just look at benchmarks and like, OpenAI
Hmm.
says, oh, like I've improved this benchmark, but like, how do you know that that benchmark even remotely applies to the data that you're trying to work with, right?
My thoughts exactly. Like, yes, there are benchmarks, and we need benchmarks, no doubt, but it's, would you rely on that completely, blindly? That's my question. It's like you need more experimentation, you need more evaluation, like you said. And yeah, I think, yeah, yeah, I'm totally on board with you on that.
I'm
Uh,
curious, like, has there been a situation like where you've kind of defined like a custom evaluation criteria or like custom evaluation data set or
no, no.
project?
So personally, I haven't worked on that, but I think so one of the reading group session with MLOps community I hosted along with other my other co-hosts of mine. So we read this paper that were out from Google. So they were talking about Google DeepMind, maybe. Yeah. So I think it was about, they created like a benchmark. And in that paper, they mentioned that we need more experimentation and, just like how we discussed just now. So there were good benchmarks, but there were some claims, there were some, and it just used Gemini.
Hmm.
So basically, the conclusion of that reading group session was that benchmark is a good start in the right direction, but would you want to believe it blindly? No, because in that paper it was just Gemini that were used, and then benchmark for different use cases. Yes, there's probably like a general benchmark evaluation that you might be able to do for general use cases, but then once you start thinking about domain specific, those benchmarks might change. So it's like the one LLM, if it works for one, general use case, will that work in healthcare, for example? Maybe not. You might need something else. You might need more experimentation, different data sets to work on. So that's what the conclusion was. Hope I kind of answered your question.
Yeah. No, and I think that's like that use case is perfect, right? Like,
Hmm.
and the
Hmm.
bar for healthcare is so much higher than any other field,
Exactly.
right?
Hmm.
Um, I don't think anybody's really like touching on like how do I set up a golden data set first of all, right? So like how do I have humans go through and put together a data set of maybe 1,000 or 100, you know, questions and answers given a certain data set? And then how do we like evaluate that ideally in an automated way, right? Like um, from the old like NLP days, there's like some basic like math functions that you can use to compare like the
Hmm.
distance between the responses and stuff. And then when I was at Contextual, we talked about the idea of like using LLMs to evaluate like the response relative to a given one. Um, but at the end of the day, a lot of it's still like, hey, like a human needs to look at this and evaluate it on tone, evaluate it
Yes.
on accuracy, the
Accuracy.
facts. Yeah.
Yep.
Um, and I don't think most data science organizations, especially outside of the Bay Area, are equipped for that type of
Yeah.
rigorous process. So yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. So that actually sparked a question in my mind. What are your thoughts about LLM being a judge of, yeah.
Yeah. I think the biggest challenge is how do you get it to give you back an answer that is on some sort of scale, right? So like everything that I've read is like if you get an LLM to like say like 0 through 10, it's not actually
Hmm.
very good at that. Like that, its ability to judge that's not good. But I have seen like Google just released Gemini for like enum based responses,
Mm,
and their focus is on like classification. So like one of the examples is given this product description, return like the quality of the item or like the its status. So like it's in good quality, it's in okay quality, it's in bad quality, etc. Right? Um, so I think like that's supposedly that like that ability to kind of classify it into buckets, it makes it
mm,
more accurate. Um,
mhm.
but I haven't done like a ton of like digging in, like is it like truly like accurate, right? Is that like, is that a benchmark that's kind of being gamed to some degree? But I, I don't know. I do think like functionally, like for the vast majority of use cases, right? The area that we're talking about evaluation for falls into a lower percentage of the category. And what I mean by that is, when we're talking about a healthcare domain,
Mhm.
one, the results need to be up here, which means the bar to judge as the results need to be much higher. But for
Yeah.
the vast majority of people, the results are really down here, and
Mhm.
the ability to judge is already here. So I think there is some ability to kind of do that. Um, and then I think the other aspect of it is like looking at LLMs as like a force multiplier as they're being applied, whereas, you know, a score that we attach to something or like a classification that we attach to something, as long as it's the same, the way it's been evaluating is the same each way or every time, technically
Mm,
like that's like uh, we can kind of compare across, right? But the moment that that model changes or the moment that the way that we calculate that score changes, now everything else isn't really comparable anymore, right? Um,
mhm.
so yeah, I don't know. It's a big question, but I think you like leveraging LLMs as a judge for like
Mhm.
certain types of results is probably good enough. But
Yeah.
if you're in like an industry where it's really, really critical, it's probably, not there
No.
yet. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if you
No.
have different
That.
thoughts.
No, no, no. I'm with you. Like right now, I'm still processing or wrapping my head around having LLM as a judge. I just feel like human should be in the loop no matter how advanced we get. So yeah, my thoughts are like similar. For some cases that are not largely applied at a big, like large scale or something, then it's okay, maybe. But yeah, still wrapping my head around that idea. Okay, so last piece of conversation or last piece of question here is I want to talk about your company. And before you mention something, I love the name because I love coffee. So, coffee black air, that's unique. That's what I thought when I came across your profile. So please tell us about your company.
Sure. So I think like the biggest thing about it is if you think about like the internet, it's kind of a stream of information, but the way that we've processed it typically is it's very static. So when we want to know something, we go search for it.
Mm-hmm.
We go to Google or whatever. Um, Social media kind of took us into a hybrid situation where now like we have this like really raw stream of data and we all have access to it, but it's too much information. So we follow people because we trust that they're going to kind of curate things, right? So
Mm-hmm.
people listen to your podcast because they know you're going to kind of curate the people that you talk to, the information that it's about, and they
Mm-hmm.
trust you as that judge, if you will. Um, LLMs represent, I guess, ironically, a way to also automate that judging process on the raw stream. So if we go back to that core idea as the internet being a stream of data, we have companies that are constantly publishing blog posts, they're publishing case studies, they're publishing press releases. On social media, it's obviously a stream of new posts, new ideas and stuff. Um, Job boards, new job listings and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
All of that information is stuff that people are interested in, like fundamentally, like they want to know about on a weekly or biweekly basis. Um, so, given my background, like I spent a lot of time in sales. Um, there's kind of two aspects there. There's one, a competitive analysis aspect. So, like if I work at Pinecone, I want to know what my top 10 competitors are doing, right? Like if they release a new hybrid search capability, I want to know what that hybrid search capability is. So at least tell me about it so I can go read more about it, right? Um,
Right.
and then the other aspect of it is an account research perspective. So uh, when we're looking at talking to a customer or a prospect that we want to make a customer, a big aspect of it is like, I think sales reps get a little of a bad rap, right? We assume that they don't really know like what they're talking
Yeah.
about or anything like that, right? But they actually put a lot of the good ones put a lot of work into understanding like what the customer's requirements are and what their initiatives are at a C-level perspective, um, and trying to relate what technology are they selling to like that problem, right? Um, so you would be shocked at the amount of like time and effort that goes into reading, company earnings reports, understanding,
Hmm.
what is a CEO saying in a podcast, what are they saying on YouTube, et cetera, CNBC, right? Um, so, anyways, those two aspects of it also go into product marketing in terms of like understanding like how does our product actually need to evolve relative to the market. There are companies out there like Gartner and Forrester and G2 that try to help go out and gather all this information and produce reports and stuff, but they're also a racketeering scam for anybody that hasn't really interacted with them before. It's pay to play, to put it quite frankly, on both sides. Customers pay a ton of money, and vendors have to pay money to go to conferences and all this stuff, and that boosts, you know, fundamentally, right? I mean, I guess without getting a little too controversial here, like Oracle shouldn't be on any Magic Quadrant, but they're on every Magic Quadrant every single year, right? Um, so, anyways, like when you look at that space, what is it all about? It's how do I understand the latest information as in the role that I have, and how does it relate to my company? Um, and so that's really what like we're looking at Coffee Black AI is like. Um, One, how do we kind of crawl that information in real time, which is very much kind of what Google does, day in, day out. But how do we take things from being reactive, where we have to go out and find information and then kind of react to it, to being
Hmm.
proactive? So when we see a new blog post come up that's relevant to what you're interested in, right? Because now LLMs can understand what you're interested in. Now we can kind of filter that stream and pass it to you directly. And so we're kind of providing this kind of curation process on top of, the internet, if you will. And
Got
that's kind of the goal.
got it. Got it. Huh, very cool. I gotta use this.
Yeah,
Yeah, thank you so much, Peyton. This was a lovely chat with you. Yeah, thanks so much for sharing your thoughts and your knowledge, especially, the first bit, AI solutions engineer. That was pretty cool.
yeah, of
Thanks so
course. Thanks,
much.
Adam. I appreciate you having me on.